There we go. So good evening. I would like to call to order the May 23rd special meeting of the Planning Policy Commission at 6:32 p.m. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. So Stephen, do we have a quorum tonight?
Vice Chair, yes, you do.
Perfect. Okay, and right back at you, Stephen. Has anyone signed up to make general public comments?
Yes, we have one person in the room signed up for public comment.
Okay, great. So comments at tonight's meeting may be made in person or virtually. For all who would like to speak during public comments, speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. If you are attending virtually by computer or by phone and would like to speak during public comments, in addition to what I just mentioned, please mute your microphone when not speaking. And if you're having technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device, such as a smartphone or a tablet, or use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. So public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and we factor them into the decisions that we make. Comments may be general or related to the topics we're discussing tonight. Though we'll also have a public hearing later on. Please note that comments are limited to 5 minutes. And so I welcome Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Victoria Hunt. I live at 352 Wilderness Peak Drive Northwest in Issaquah, and I am currently serving on the Issaquah City Council. I have served on the City Council since 2018, but before, until the very day that I started serving on council, before that I served on the Planning Policy Commission. And I know firsthand how much work you all put into this and how important it is to our process and to the city. So I really am here tonight to thank you all for the hours you take out of your busy life to do this volunteer work and to help us at the City Council make the best possible decisions for the benefit of the entire community. On the City Council, I also am the chair of the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee. And so we are the committee that oftentimes does receive those recommendations in the first step of our process for things like the Title 18 Municipal Code updates, which was a very big lift that you all helped with tremendously. And we are all very grateful for those inputs that helped us get that project across the finish line, lands that plane. That was a very big lift, lots of community input and lots of input from you that was invaluable to our process. I also wanted to be sure to thank you all because I know that there were many meetings and many different deep dives into topics that will continue into the future, and many of the topics that you take the public comments on, we use that, we do watch your meetings, we look at your meeting notes, and we be sure to factor all of that into our decisions. It's extremely important, and we thank you so much. And for decades to come, I think that especially with things like Title 18, you will have a real impact. So thank you so much. And we are all available, City Council members are all available. If you have questions for us, or if you want to know how we are using your input, we have our phone numbers and emails on the city website. We would love to hear from you directly if that's helpful. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I can speak on all of our behalfs when I say we appreciate the thanks and the kudos, and to you all as well, knowing that a lot of work went in from staff and from council and everybody on Title 18 over the last year and a half or so. Is there anyone signed up to speak virtually?
No one else has signed up to speak.
Okay. So we will move on then to our public hearing. So tonight we are holding a public hearing regarding proposed amendments to aid in increasing diversity of housing in Issaquah. So the public hearing, we've all, I think, sat through one of these, but it'll work as follows. So staff will first make a presentation. PPC will ask any clarifying questions. I'll then open the comment period. I will close the public hearing, and then we will deliberate. And so with that, I will go ahead and open the public hearing at 6:36 p.m. So Kristen, go ahead.
All right, thank you for your patience. Always takes me a minute to get that set up. It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. So, before I start, I do want to add on to Councilmembers Hunt's discussion that they read the minutes and that they watch. They really do. They either watch, or for every time that we take one of our topics to the City Council and to the Planning Development Environment Committee, we include the agenda, all of the attachments, the links to the videos so that they can watch those, and the minutes. So, plus all the public comments that we get. So they really do pay attention to all of that. So thank you to them. Moving on, we are here for a public hearing. So tonight we are talking about, doesn't want to move. There we go. Tonight we are holding a public hearing, and we are going to take public comment regarding the proposed amendments, believe it or not, to Title 18 regarding housing diversity. So as you recall, this is part of implementing our housing strategy. Here's our housing continuum, and where we invest our money and our time regarding housing. And we are tonight focusing on the Housing Action Work Plan, specifically market rate rental and ownership housing. We're focusing on Strategy 8, Diversity of Housing, which says to incorporate code provisions to increase the potential diversity of housing types built in the city. We talked about this last time. The 3 different types of housing that we looked at are cottage housing, courtyard housing, which we've changed from apartments, and micro units. Also, you'll find out soon, known as single room occupancies. Okay. So the immediate issues, as you recall from our previous discussion, there are many issues that factor into getting these here and making these happen. So, it's cost of land, cost of construction, parking, height, density. All these things need to be taken into consideration. But the first step, because we'd like to wait on the parking strategy to be done first so that we can look at it comprehensively, the first step that we're going to take is to include definitions, because we have no definitions. These also are not included as permitted uses in our permitted uses table. So we'd like to take that first step and get that done. So the first one, starting with definitions, is cottage housing. So this is what you saw last time, and it was a little long and you all commented on it. Cottage housing development is detached single-family housing in a cluster of 4 to 12 units around a centralized courtyard, and then we listed all these different things, right? And you all asked us to, 1, please be more specific regarding the size of the units. You asked if we need to mention condominium, because it talks about how it might be set on a condominium setting, and if you'll recall, that was units on detached units, it could be on unsubdivided land, so that people are buying the building and not the land below it that's commonly owned. And that's why it was mentioned that way. And then we also removed some of the excess language just to shorten it, add a little brevity. So size of units, we looked at 5 different cities, and their maximums ranged anywhere from 1,200 square feet to 1,700 square feet. So, and there were no minimums mentioned in any of these. And one of the things that you asked about were, are there minimum size units? They're not. We found in the building code, the International Building Code, it talks about the minimum size of a bedroom, which is 60 square feet, but there's nothing about unit itself. So we didn't put a minimum in here because you have to assume that the market too is going to drive. Nobody's going to buy a 60, it just won't work. If your bedroom has to be 60 square, it's just not going to work. So we didn't include that, but we are proposing 1,700 square feet as a minimum. Do we need to mention condominium? No, we don't. How they develop it is kind of up to them, but we can also address it if we want to be more specific. Kirkland doesn't care. If you look at their code, it can be done either way. It can be done as a condominium or it can be subdivided. We can talk about when the standards come, which way we want to see, if there's a way that we want to see that happen, or leave it up to the developer. And then, as I said, we removed excess language. So here's what we changed it to. Cottage housing development means detached single-family housing. In a cluster of 4 to 12 dwelling units around a central open space, providing residences for households that are no larger than 1,700 square feet in size. Units may share use of common facilities such as a party room, tool shed, garden, orchard, workshop, or parking areas. And I should note that in the memo that I sent you, I still included the word condominium. So I took it out of this one. We're not using that. It's not here. Okay? All right. I'm going to move on. Is that okay if I move on to the next one? Commissioner Bader? Vice Chair Bader? Okay. and we can do questions at the end. Courtyard apartments. This is what we started with last week. Courtyard apartments or courtyard housing is the development of several attached dwelling units arranged around a central courtyard or lawn area, which all units have access to. Developments are typically 1 to 3 stories. You asked us to please change apartments to housing, so it is now, we are now calling it cottage housing and not cottage apartments. Our city attorney, this was all run by our city attorneys, and they asked us to provide more specificity on the number of units. And they also asked us to provide more specificity regarding the number of walls surrounding a courtyard to better define what we have a definition of courtyard, but they wanted a definition of how many walls surround a courtyard. And when we looked, it was 2 to 3. So it is now we're proposing courtyard means a development of 6 or more attached dwelling units located in 1 or more buildings arranged on 2 or 3 sides around a central courtyard or lawn area which all units have access to. And they're typically 1 to 3 stories. Okay. She also asked, our city attorney asked if the buildings had to be if all the units had to be in 1 building or if they could be detached. And the more I looked, there were some that were detached, but they were just all still made a courtyard. So, around the courtyard. Micro units, they are apartments. This is a really long one, and you all thankfully asked us to cut this. So I'm just going to not read the whole thing and say that we did, but I will talk about it. You asked, why is the minimum 125 square feet? As it was 125 to 400 square feet. Reference size, please reference the unit size to the building or applicable code. Can we use single room occupancy as part of the definition and stop definition after community space? So as I mentioned, we did that. We're also included single room occupancy as part of the definition. And as I mentioned a minute ago, in here, the sizes range from a minimum of 125 to a maximum of 500. So we went sort of towards the top and just said a maximum of 400 square feet for that. And as I mentioned, the International Building Code just talks about bedroom size and not unit size. So there was nothing for us to refer to there. So we can't really refer to that, which is why the size is listed here. So our proposal is to say micro units or single room occupancies means apartments that are no more than 400 square feet. They may include private bathroom and kitchen spaces or have access to shared kitchens, bathrooms, and community space. The last amendment that we're proposing has not changed from the last time you saw it. We are including courtyard housing, cottage housing, and micro units, and I do need to put a little slash there and say single room occupancies. Courtyard apartments or courtyard housing we're proposing in MFH, so multifamily high East Sunset, multifamily medium Old Town, and mixed use residential. And then cottage housing, we are proposing for multifamily high and MFHES, multifamily medium and MFMOAT, and then micro units in mixed use residential, mixed use central Issaquah, and the urban core. So our recommended motion would be to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to Title 18, adding definitions for cottage housing, courtyard housing, and micro units, and adding these 3 uses to 18.402.020 permitted uses table. The next steps would be that would go to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee on June 6th for a recommendation from them to City Council on June 26th for action. And that's all I have. So if you have any questions, I am here.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. So we'll open up for questions. I just asked, since we're in a public hearing, if you just raise your hand and I'll call on you. I promise I will call on you, just to kind of keep us nice and orderly here. So any clarifying questions?
Oh, no, never mind. Yep, okay.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, and thanks for responding to our comments so constructively. I have a 2-part question about the same topic. Last time we met, we talked about these as definitions and that the other half of the work is setting standards. And, what might a standard be? I'm thinking, do front doors need to be facing the courtyard, or something like that, fences, things like that. And what would happen if we added these to a permitted use, but we didn't have a standard set yet? How would a building permit application or whatever application would apply at this time be waiting for standards?
So as I mentioned last time with micro units and courtyard housing, those are technically allowed currently in our code. So those would not be hard to apply standards to. We want to make it easier for these things to happen. So they could happen now under the current standards. It just wouldn't be as easy as when we go back and hopefully adjust things to make it more doable. Yeah. The cottage housing, though, that one is more difficult. I would have to check probably with, I'm not sure, but I would need to check on that one and see how that would work exactly. Our definition provides some description of how it goes, and that it has a shared courtyard, and it has a shared facility, and it has shared parking on site. So that is some description, but I'd have to check. Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that one?
So if we adopt the definitions and the changes to the use table, when would that come into effect, and is there any reason to go through this formal adoption but hold until we have standards?
It would go into effect 5 days after council adoption. And yes, yeah, it still takes a while to develop, so somebody would have to come in, find land. It's not something that's going to happen right away. But this way, if they were more ready when they do. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Kennedy.
Not a question. I have a really, really tiny little nitpick. On the very, very first definition, it used 2 numbers. One was spelled as a word and one was used as a number. Can we make them either both words or both numbers? I have a consistency thing.
I have a quick clarifying question. As I listened to last time around's meeting, I thought I understood this, but now I think I don't. So the courtyard and the micro units are currently allowed under code. They're just not called out specifically, and the cottage housing is not. Or it is, but there's not.
The
standards for it.
micro units and courtyards are allowed. We just don't say where. So this is clearer for developers who come in.
Yeah.
Because, they might come in and ask a current planner, can I put this in, mixed use CI, and we go, I don't know. So this makes it clearer for developers.
Yeah.
And correct, cottage units are not.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Esmeralda.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. The micro units, are they present in Issaquah now?
They are not.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I mentioned last time.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
The developers had asked, but they didn't think they were allowed.
So now it'll give them a little bit more of a route to be able to actually do that with more definition now.
Correct.
Okay.
Vice Chair Bader, one additional question with the micro units. Are those different than like studios?
They are studios, because studios, you're always going to have a kitchen in the unit. And micro units, you don't necessarily have to have that. And studios can be up to, 800 square feet. This actually limits the maximum size.
Got
Where
it.
studios are not limited in their size.
Okay, so it could be a small studio, but
It
it's a
could be,
different
yes.
thing.
It would just be 400 square feet or less.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Hearing none, I will open the floor now to public comment. If we have anyone signed up. Steven, has anyone signed up to speak?
Vice Chair, we don't have anybody attending virtually, and we don't have anybody in the room that would like to speak.
Okay, so given that there are no public comments, I will close the public hearing at 6:52. Okay, so now it is time to deliberate. So there is a proposed motion. I don't think we need to formally make that motion, if that's right, to adopt the definitions as written, as were just presented to us. I open the floor for deliberation. Yeah, Commissioner Patterson.
I appreciate the adjustments that were made given our prior conversation, and I feel confident about the way that these were presented today, and therefore I would be in favor of recommending this to the council.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. Yeah, I second the thanks, and also appreciate that, say the micro units were allowed, but the clarification of the appropriate zones to allow them is really a great addition to that use, because they will be much more appreciated, and especially since in the future we want to talk about those zones and whether parking is available or not, and that'll help in the affordability of developing those, not based on the housing type, because I'm looking forward to talking about that, about where it is, but I really appreciate showing on the use table where these types are allowed. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Vice Chair Bader. I agree. I think it sounds like it's just kind of making that knowledge of what these are, where they're allowed, that much clearer. And so, again, not having been in the last conversation, but listening to it, it feels like all of the comments were taken into account in the updated definition. So I agree with the support of them. Yeah, Commissioner Issaquah.
Yeah, Commissioner Simwita, I just wanted to add, I'm in agreement with these changes, and the key thing is that this provides more options for affordable housing, and I think this is a good thing at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks. And Commissioner Krass, Commissioner Kennedy, I want to make sure that you get your voices heard. Good? Perfect. Okay, so let's do a quick show of hands. I think we're all on consensus, but good with the definitions as presented? And changes to the permitted use table? Perfect. All right, I think we're good on that. Okay. Great. Okay,
Thank you
that
very
was easy. I was nervous about like having to run the public hearing, but if they can all be like that, then perfect. Okay, so we will move right along then. To our regular business. So the first item under regular business is the adoption of a virtual attendance policy and rules and regulations. So Stephen Padua, our long-range planning manager, and Tisha, is Tisha here?
She is on the way, so we're going to
Okay.
do this a little backwards. I'll start with the general changes that were added to the rules and regulations, and then when Tisha arrives, we'll start talking specifically about the virtual policy that she's presenting on tonight. And then we'll go to a vote to adopt the rules and regulations.
Okay, so famous last words about the public hearing being easy, because this will probably be, maybe not so much, but give me grace. Okay, so Stephen, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, can everybody see the screen? So if everybody, I don't know if everybody was able to review the rules and regulations. I provided a red line version so you could see where all the edits were. The biggest changes that were made to the rules and regulations is first, when we adopted Title 18, we removed the commission's responsibility for site-specific rezones. And so we removed all mention of quasi-judicial process from the rules and regulations. And so that was added throughout, so references were removed, the process were removed from the public hearing steps in terms of like how the commission conducts its public hearings, when public comment is presented during public hearings, and so forth. So are there any questions around any of those edits? Okay. The other big question is specifically around the virtual attendance policy and unfortunately, Tisha has the presentation for that one. So when she gets here, we'll talk about that. But are there any specific questions in terms of the language that you might have saw in the draft or in the presentation material that Tisha had provided as part of tonight's materials?
Thank you. And pardon me if I missed it, but one of the questions I had in my mind was about, and I'm really excited about maintaining the virtual hybrid format, especially for public comment. But I was also developing a concern about how we have people from the public identify themselves, especially when we have it open to a virtual. And so I just wanted a little more information about how we manage going forward that rule that you state your name and your association with the city. We're kind of loose about that, and I thought having it open to anyone chiming in from a remote location, we might need to have a stricter rule.
So the state regulation around public comment and people providing information about who they are, where they're from, we can have a very strict policy around it, but when it comes to the state regulation around it, it's not really specific saying we actually need to have them present that information, particularly for commission meetings. For city council, the rules are a little bit different, but for a planning commission, the rules aren't as strict. And so it really is at the commission's discretion on whether or not they want to be strict with that policy or that type of policy when it comes to public comment for our meetings. And so I don't know if you want to discuss that tonight in terms of, do we want to have a strict policy in making sure someone provides their name and where they're from, or is it primarily an optional item? We would still present, please speak your name and location or where you're from as part of public comment, but not necessarily make it a requirement.
So the ones that I've seen, people say their name and their address, and I've always seen them, they're all in Issaquah. Is there a rule that they need to be in Issaquah to be able to make public comment, or just they have to just state their address? And it's, so that's, okay.
No, the
That's
rule
just-
isn't, yeah, the rule isn't specific saying you can only be from Issaquah to speak
Okay.
at public
It
comment.
just happened to be
It's
the one-
primarily just
Yes.
identifying yourself.
The name and address.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I've seen this argued from a couple of points of view. People don't like saying what their home address is for privacy concerns, and I can appreciate that. I totally support that. And what is more meaningful to me is, what is your relation to the city? You know, you might live in Bellevue, but you have a job here as an executive director of an organization that's materially associated with the subject matter that we're talking about. Now that I say that, though, if we're not making any quasi-judicial decisions where we have interested parties, if that's really no longer on the table, maybe it's not as big of a concern, but I'm not able to really wrap my head around what all the decisions we may make could be materially, people could be speaking who have material benefit, and I want to know if they do when they're addressing me. That's the nature of my interest.
And like I said, we can always ask people giving public comment to provide certain information about their relationship with the city. It's typically where are you from, what's your, and maybe a general statement around your relationship with the city, but it's not consistent across the board for all the boards and commissions in terms of like what they're asking public commenters to provide for information.
I totally agree with Commissioner Milligan. I would like to see, I'd forego the address. I could see people not wanting to give that, but I would love name and just your affiliation with the city. Whatever that is. I think I'd prefer that because I think people would be more comfortable. And that's really more important than what your address is, because address doesn't, we're not going to sit here and do a little Google search. We don't necessarily know what that affiliation is.
One thing I would add is a general statement of what's your relationship to the city. Not everybody really understands what that means. And so you'll get actually a really wide variety of responses to that, of whether I'm a resident or I live nearby or I'm related to someone in Issaquah. Like you'll get with a broad statement like that, you'll get pretty broad responses. And so that's kind of why sometimes public comment, you'll ask for more specific information like your address, because that's very specific.
Could we say, state your name and your relationship to the matter before us, or the matters before the commission? Because there is a reason why they're here. They're here because of some matter before, so they should know the answer to that question, or they wouldn't be here.
Or the matter they're going to speak to.
I guess it also comes down to, I mean, is the intent to have people who have an affiliation, whether they live here, work here, or something like that? So I think asking, you know, to the specific address, but like, you know, what area do you live in the city? If not, you know, your association with the city, because I think that has a lot more weight than just somebody who cares about it, has nothing to do with this. So there could be a topic up here and then it means nothing to them because they live somewhere else and they like to talk. So it's, I think transparency and openness of what that connection is important. It sounds like we don't exclude any of that, but I think it's also a good piece of information for us to understand, is it relevant or not?
Hi, Tisha.
Yeah, Commissioner Smirney.
Yeah, and I think the question about their address could be a little bit limited because it may keep public from commenting because they may not want to divulge their address. So we should probably look into that to see what other question we could ask them, like what neighborhood or that they're from.
I also think you can usually like infer based on their comments, you know, what their relationship to the subject matter is. I wouldn't want to be so intimidating for people to think about like, ooh, do I have to, you know, meet a certain requirement to comment that kind of then prohibits or kind of scares people away from commenting. But maybe that's something we can just add to the script, right? About say, you know, introduce yourself, state like your relationship to the city or whatever the term is, and then it's kind of up to people to interpret what that means. And yeah, Jesse.
On that note, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind scrolling to section 7D, I think it is, number 2. Keep going, a little further, a little further, a little further.
This section right here, public participation.
Yeah, and then number 2 below there.
Oh, I see.
There you go.
Got it.
So yeah, as it's stated in here, it says commenters must state their name and relationship to city, example, resident, business owner, property owner, etc. And then they're encouraged but not required to provide their address. So that's how it's currently written, which seems kind of where we're going, I think, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of the idea. So I'm pretty content with how it's shown there. I think it's, you know, kind of protects their privacy by not forcing them to reveal an address, but also give some context as to what they're speaking to or why they're here. So by hopefully providing their relation to the city.
Great. And now that Tisha's here, should we pause this discussion and hear the presentation and then we can continue after? Or?
Are you still getting set up, Tisha? Okay, so as we can continue the conversation, and then once Tisha's fully set up, then we can transition to her presentation about the virtual policy. So what I'm hearing is the language that's currently in the drafts would satisfy a lot of the comments that we're hearing tonight. Is there?
Thank you, Jesse, for finding that, and I think it just is upon us to follow through and enforce it, because it does say must state the relationship. And so we just need to do a little better job of getting that part done. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other sections that the commissioners would like to take a look at tonight in the draft? Again, not much really changed from before, with the exception of removing quasi-judicial process and then adding in the virtual policy that Tisha will be discussing tonight.
Should we hold questions about the virtual policy until after the presentation?
Yes, because she might answer some of your
Yeah.
questions about the virtual policy with her presentation. Are you? Okay, so I am going to stop sharing, and I am going to allow Tisha to share.
I'm sorry for my tardiness.
No need.
Okay, now I turn it over to Tisha, who's the city clerk, and she's going to be presenting on the virtual policy tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, it sounds like filling some time there between your last agenda item and this one. So as Stephen said, my name's Tisha Gieser, city clerk, and I met most of you last year around this time when I provided open government training, and we have a new commissioner, so welcome. So yes, tonight I'm here to talk to you about two things, and the first is the virtual attendance policy, and let me pull up my PowerPoint. I have just a few slides. And Stephen, did you start talking through some of the other changes? You did, it's the Title 18, okay. All right, so I will just focus on the virtual attendance element. During COVID-19, the city has 13 boards and commissions, and during COVID, we moved all of them to all virtual meetings, and we were able to do that because the governor issued a proclamation sort of prohibiting in-person meetings. So that proclamation was terminated in June of last year, and in July and September, we phased back all the boards and commissions. And initially, the mayor's direction was board and commissioners in seats in rooms and continuing to allow virtual attendance for members of the public. So that, because we found that, I'm not sure that you would say that our volume of comments increased during COVID, but people definitely seemed to be interested in participating virtually in the convenience, and so we wanted to continue that. But we did hear some feedback from board and commission members that they had a desire to be able to attend virtually in some occasions. And so the mayor asked me to draft a policy that I have been taking around to the boards and commissions over the last year. And because your commission has been so busy with some other vital work, you're one of the last commissions to consider this policy. But the mayor's direction was to continue to emphasize in-person attendance. I think from her perspective, it's really valuable when people come into the meeting room, and I know you, and I would be interested, Stephen, have you noticed between virtual and in-person public comment, what would you say the commission's seeing?
I would say the commission in the last couple of years has seen a lot more virtual public comment than in person. You still have some of the regulars that like to be in person versus virtual, but it also is sometimes shift depending on availability. But this has kind of opened the door to allow a lot of the regular attendees to attend even when there's personal scheduling conflicts. So.
And that's we've been seeing pretty consistently at the city council meetings. I'm seeing about 50-50 with public. That's just, I haven't calculated that officially, but that's just my observation. So the mayor is really wanting to make sure that when people come out to the meeting room, that they have some people to look at, and that there is, and you'll see if you've looked through the proposed policy, it is that a quorum of the commission, so 4 commissioners would be required to be in person. And so the city is still wanting to encourage that. Also, not just the being in person for members of the public, but also I think there's connection you can have before the meeting, during breaks. There's just something that being in person can give you with each other that is difficult to achieve. And so the proposed policy does continue to emphasize attending in person, but allows sort of requesting permission to attend virtually if a quorum of the commission can be in person. So it'd be sort of an assumption for each meeting that you would be attending in person, but if you were on a business trip or you had an ill child and wanted to be from home, you would reach out to the staff to sort of request virtual attendance. All of your meetings have a virtual element, all of your regular meetings, so we don't have to worry about setting up additional equipment. And I understand over the last year you've been using, certain commissioners have been using that virtual option, which is great. So tonight is a discussion about sort of the norms for the commission. So the policy talks a little bit about just making sure there's a good audio connection, encourages having the video on if you're participating at home. It also emphasizes that if you are unwell, please request an excused absence. If you're on vacation with your family, please request an excused absence. This virtual element isn't meant to, require you at every meeting. And then there are some other minor changes through the rules to just formalize the fact that we're committing to having that virtual component for all regular meetings. Some special meetings, like for example, if you did any kind of tour or kind of a social gathering, we probably would not extend the virtual element to those, but certainly your regular meetings. And then clarifies that staff and the public may also attend virtually. And then it sounds like Stephen talked to you a little bit about some of the changes we wanted to make to the rules to conform them to the Title 18 updates and the shift of the code pertaining to PPC into Title 2 of the municipal code. And so the options tonight, and just before we get to the options, just a comment. So we have 13 boards and commissions, and I've assisted 6 of the commissions in talking through this policy. 3 of them adopted pretty much the version that's before you tonight. And then we have had 2 of our commissions who have the Equity Commission and Human Services Commission who've wanted to have fewer restrictions on attending virtually and make that more open-ended. And our environmental board and park board made some slight changes to encourage but not require the quorum be in person. So the boards are making some changes, and I'm here to talk to you about those tonight, hear your thoughts about what you're interested in. If you're interested in the policy as proposed, there is a motion to adopt the amendments, and that is all I have on this topic.
Thanks, Tisha. And so I think before we start discussion, we need a motion. The motion can. Do questions first? Questions first. Okay. Like I said, knew it would go smoothly. Okay, so questions. Yeah, Commissioner Kress.
So, I mean, everything's very logical, thank you. The idea of encouraging participation in person is great. I think it's also important that the meetings happen. So the only questions I have are around as you mentioned, the quorum. I mean, encourage the quorum to be here, but if it's not, it'd be a shame to lose momentum of an organization if you still have people who could do it, but they are virtual. So that was one thing. So my question is the learnings from the discussions with the other ones of why they adopted or had that change, and what their thoughts or intent were on that. That may help influence the discussion here.
Yeah, and that is a good point. And actually, you'll notice the policy, and this was motivated by the Planning Commission that was operating with a real skeleton crew for a while. You know, some of so if there are 2 or more vacancies on the commission, then that requirement that a quorum be in person would go away. Because you're right, if we have 2 vacancies, it could be difficult to get a quorum. I think the conversations with the other boards have been less around that. So one of the things most of our boards and commissions have are alternate members. And so that gives us, usually it's 2 to 3 members, but that really help ensure that we are always able to obtain that quorum. So that has been a little less, I'd say, with the other boards and commissions, the discussion around requiring the quorum. Some of them have had concerns over the administrative burden of that and just not wanting it to become too cumbersome, but also I think more so there have been some members of those boards that like the flexibility of attending virtually and want to be able to continue to do that, and just advocated for that.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, and thanks for that question, Commissioner Krass. If we do not have a quorum of people, of commissioners in person, remind me, is the meeting canceled, or are we just unable to take actions? What's the outcome?
The clerk's office would recommend that the meeting just not occur. So technically, there was an informational item, but the meeting isn't really happening. If there need to be 4 of you for there to be a planning policy commission. If there are 3 of you, it isn't a planning policy commission. It's 3 people, and so we would recommend to staff that nothing occur if there's not a quorum.
And remind me, what's the notice that we're supposed to give that we're not coming to a meeting, whether it's in person or an excused absence?
I believe we recommend 5 days, but we say in the rules that we understand emergencies happen, and so if it needs to be more last minute, we understand.
Any other questions? Okay, so now that motion. Yes, please.
I move to amend the Planning Policy Commission rules and regulations by adopting amendments throughout to correct the Issaquah Municipal Code references and to adopt amendments to Article 4, Section 1, regular meetings, Section 7, participation, and add a new Section 6, virtual attendance as proposed.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Okay, now we'll open this up for discussion.
I like the amendments. I would be inclined to stick to it the way it's been drafted. I'm really glad you brought up what the other commissions have done, because that was my first question is, well, what all have they done? I think having a quorum in person, I think we need to be here as much as possible. And I get their desire for flexibility. I love flexibility is great. But to hold business, I think it's really important that we encourage at least that we be here as much as possible, and keep those exceptions for business travel, illness, vacations. Things come up for sure, but if it's just, I don't feel like coming down here this evening. I'd rather do it from my den. That we should be here.
This may be a clarifying question, but I guess for the commissioners who've been here before, some of us joined, what was the, I guess, percentage of individuals coming to the actual commission in person to have that quorum, per se? Did we have any issues where we were less than 4 people?
I think
Albeit COVID happened, of course. I would say in the last couple of years, we've only had a few instances where we came close to not having a quorum, but I would say, part of staff's job is checking to see what the attendance is going to be, have a good idea if we're going to be even close to not meeting a quorum. The closest we ever been was only at a point where we only had 4 members.
Yeah.
And so we were checking every day, hey, are you coming? Are you coming? And we really never got to a point where we had to cancel a meeting because we didn't have a quorum.
I think with that, because it's based on the individuals that are in these seats, and we have a culture of showing up, basically. And if we can't show up, of course, we would talk with the city staff to let them know. I think that flexibility will still be good in the sense of the point that our commissioner just made, to be able to ensure that the meetings continue to move forward in the event that you don't have 4 people in person. I'm for everyone being here in person, but we also have to make sure that business continues to move forward as well.
Yeah, as a commissioner who has taken advantage of the virtual attendance options, both by necessity, being pregnant, and having to attend virtually, to having to have kids at home and just manage that, I really appreciate the virtual option. I also really enjoy the in-person setting, and so I'm more on the line of like lessening, because my concern, and this is maybe not warranted, is that if you have the sniffles, right, where you're not so sick that you can't participate, I would rather, as a mom to now small babies, I would rather you attend virtually than say, ooh, you know what, I can't, I have to be there in person, and so I'm going to come in with my sniffles, right? And so just for those sorts of situations, I'd like to have the flexibility for us to attend virtually without worrying about, am I going to jeopardize the meeting and things like that? Because I would hate for somebody to feel like, I'm not sure if I should attend this, right? But I'm going to because I don't want to mess things up. So for that reason, I think that kind of encourage but not require the quorum language might be what I'm more in favor of.
I'll argue that point. I want to second Commissioner Kennedy's assertion that how important it is to be in person at a quorum. And the reason that the way that I got there was when we were all virtual, we were all in the same room, and I felt that the dynamic of the board was really very productive. And when we're here on the dais, I feel it's very productive. When there's one person or maybe two on the screen or on the camera, I personally don't feel their presence as much. I don't, it's my fault, of course, I could, but I'm just saying honestly, it's very hard to incorporate that into the dynamic of the group working together. And I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy commissions so much is this, the persuasiveness of having us together and really listening and hearing and engaging with one another and understanding what one another is saying. I was inclined, and I think I still am, to have a quorum present. There's still, as long as we have enough commissioners. And so what's the total number of this body? It's 9? No, I'm sorry, what is it and what's the quorum?
So there are 7 regular members
7.
and 2 alternate members. Right now you have 1 vacancy, so you have a total of 8, and you would need 4 bodies and seats under the policy.
I would think the critical thing to do is make sure we have all our seats filled so that if you have the sniffles, you don't have to come. But I do think that the quorum in person is important to me.
So I think we agree on the guiding principles of number 1, being in person, because all good things happen. I mean, it's great. 2 is you don't want to miss work. Like you don't want to have to not have a meeting, which then it opens my next, I have a question is let's forget COVID, like a lot of us want to, and go like the 2 years before COVID. How many meetings got canceled because there was not a quorum? Did it happen ever? Meaning, is this even a big issue? Like, if it never happened in the last a couple years leading up to quorum, then I feel very confident to say have it in person because we could probably manage to that. But if that was an issue, then I think
pre-COVID, I wasn't involved with the commission. I heard that maybe 1 meeting was canceled before that, but I'm not sure of the exact date. So consistently, the commission has always done a good job of getting a quorum for its meetings.
So, so then I agree if we want to like drive it to have people here, and if we find that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, there's going to be a meeting that's not going to be made because people can only do it virtually because of this, can this be changed again and then say there's at the discretion of the chair, they can allow the next meeting or something along those lines?
Yes, and I mean, this is all an exercise, right, in trying to kind of figure out, I think every commission I've spoken to, it's kind of like trying to figure out what the new normal is and what everyone's comfortable with. And so I do expect that there will need to be some changes. Your point is a good point. If we're finding that quorum can't be achieved, but there are commissioners who are readily available virtually, I think we would want to make a change because that doesn't serve the city well or you well. You're setting aside your time. So that's something that either could be adjusted tonight, or certainly these rules can be adopted by the commission and amended by the commission at any time with just some advance notice in the agenda. So, and I do expect we'll be making further tweaks. This is kind of a first try.
On first read, when I got this in the packet, I felt I was in full support of the draft or the motion. I still do. I think that the way it's worded and how I read it, the virtual option allows for flexibility in certain circumstances, but it still encourages, and the preference is still to be in person. And right now we're discussing the idea of the in-person quorum, which I think it does present. However, it does say an exception can be made if there's going to be absences that would eliminate a quorum. Then we could turn to our virtual attendees to make up for that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, you're making me want to read it again because maybe that the intention was if there's 2 or more vacancies on the commission, then the quorum would be, that's sort of waived. Like we're going to take you however we can get you to make sure we can convene the meetings. But, and I, the language could maybe be stronger, but my intention was that if you are like in your situation now where you only have 1 vacancy, if you couldn't have a quorum in person, then it would be a little questionable to persist with the meeting with the virtual. I mean, I would need to talk to our city attorney about how risky that would be, but it's certainly not something we would want to do on a regular basis. We'd want to amend the rules. And so if there is concern about that now, we could make a change to soften it to encourage rather than require the quorum in person. And some of the other commissions have chosen to do that.
Got it. Yeah, and thanks for highlighting, Stephen. That's what I
Yeah,
was
so I got
referring
on the
to.
screen right now that specific exception language for where a quorum might be.
Yeah, I still feel the same way. I feel like the softer language that just allows for that possibility. I think we're all committed to being here in person. Again, as someone who has attended virtually, I've had both a horrible experience where none of the audio worked and I had to watch you all on YouTube and try to follow along, which might be why you didn't sense my presence, because I was about 35 seconds behind all of you. But I've also felt like I was like there and commenting in meetings. I think there's only been like 3 or so that I've attended virtually, but it hasn't been a negative experience for me as a virtual participant. And so, again, I think we want to put forward that the preference is for in-person, but I think just having that flexibility, because I think none of us would want a meeting to be canceled, but again, my preference is that if you don't, I'm, again, the germaphobe with the mask still on 7 years later, if you're like, oh, I'm not sure, I would want people to have the ability to just, stay home and still be able to join and contribute. And I think that flexibility allows for that. I'm still gonna argue that point. Yeah, Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, and I'm the same as well, to have that flexibility. We have a culture of showing up. We're in a new age where technology is here. We could use technology. There may be some technical issues, but that's because we're not using it enough at the end of the day. The key thing is that I've been seeing these same faces for almost a year now in person, so I don't think that's really going to change at the end of the day. So why institute a restriction that's not needed because we're already here? Thank you.
And I'm wondering, Tisha, if you have like the language that the commissions who have softened it used?
Yes, I'm not sure I'm not sure how quickly I can do this, but I can talk through the, if you want the precise wording, I would either need a few minutes or we can bring this back, but essentially it would be, we sort of took out the, let's see, they may request permission, softened that, and then remove 1, basically, here under, section, I'm looking at my screen. Let me share it with you so you can see it. Okay, so here's the section 6 virtual attendance. Make that a little bit bigger. So we would essentially kind of strike out request permission. We'd soften this sentence here, and then remove 1, and then kind of true it up so that it reads in a streamlined way. We take out the exception language and 1, and do a little bit of reformatting and a little bit of wordsmithing to just make it flow. So that is one option. I think we've had two commissions kind of go this way, where it's still an encourage on the in-person, but not have formal permission that needs to be granted, and not requiring but encouraging a quorum, which is what I'm hearing. So we'd probably also want to put a phrase in here, and I can mock this up either now or bring it back with those changes.
And I can make a motion? Okay. Amendment. So I propose an amendment to the motion where we, I think, this isn't going to be well worded. I think formal permission, I still think like a notification and like okay process, right, is, yeah, so removing kind of formal permission. And I think it's, the language that's in number 1 is okay, but taking out the requirement of the 2 or more vacancies so that that can apply to any commission. So really the only changes are notification instead of express kind of formal permission. And an exception can be made to the requirement for an in-person quorum if that's not possible at a certain meeting. A second.
A second. I like those changes.
Okay, and now we'll discuss that amendment. Thank you all for bearing with me in my clunkiness of this.
Well, my initial comments about in person, I mean, it goes, we all seem to be on the same page. We're all on the same page, encouraging in person to be here in person, but we also agree that flexibility is good. I mean, we've all lived through COVID. We've dealt with the Zoom meetings. And I totally agree. I don't want someone coming if they've got a cold just because they feel they have to be here. I agree. I would prefer they stay home and not give me whatever it is they have. So I see us as all on the same page. It might just be very minor tweaks to, you know, the option, not needing the permission. I think we can tweak that pretty easily. But that's where I'm still in the same stance of let's be here in person, let's have quorum in person. But I still wanted that flexibility when we need it. So that's why I like your interchanges.
See what being in person does for you? I'm being persuaded, if I understand correctly, that the first section A would be changing from required to get permission, but you have to give notice, in that the number 1 would end after if they're unable, an exception may be made to this requirement if they're unable to make a quorum. Something like that does give some discretion for those reasons and gives us flexibility. Boy, if we start having no-shows though, I'm gonna go back to my old way of thinking.
Yeah, Commissioner Kress.
But I think if we see that there's no shows, then we can amend it again and solve that problem.
Yeah, and I'm solely speaking as like a germaphobe here, not as somebody who wants to like sit. I sit on enough Zoom meetings all day that this is like a welcome, you know, thing to come and talk with you all in person. So, yeah, the intention behind this is not to just hang out at home and like, you know, eat dinner in front of the computer while we're on these meetings. It's to, you know, when we need to be home, be able to be home, but still have the meeting continue.
There are words in here that talk about when you are virtual, that you have to be giving your full attention. And so there are expectations behind it. Yeah, so they're very good.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess one other note, now that we've made these adjustments, is number 3, A3, would also likely need to be modified, just wording wise. It also kind of reflects the idea of permissions, and so it might just need some wordsmithing on that front.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, I'm reading.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because now reading through it again, given our understanding of, you know, the fact that we all just Zoom into these meetings nowadays anyway, and no equipment needs to be set up, can't we just strike number 3?
And I'll just speak up and add that when we've made this similar change for the other boards, we've kind of removed the anything referring to request permission and just said advance notice will be provided, and then made a statement encouraging a quorum in attendance, but not mandating it. So I would recommend, it's not perfectly marked up right now, so I'll kind of defer to your comfort level with this proposed amendment. I think I understand clearly what the amendment, which has not yet been voted on, but what it intends to achieve.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? Okay, so should we vote on the amendment first or the main motion? Okay, so let's vote on the amendment, which is to no longer require permission, but provide advance notice of a need to attend virtually, and still desire to have an in-person quorum, but to have the exception made if we're not able to get there, so that the meeting can continue. So all in favor of that amendment?
Aye. Oh, hands.
Hands, I'll do it. So I think we're unanimous on that then. So that passes. Okay, and so then we have the original motion, which is to adopt as presented and proposed in here. Anyone in favor?
Aye.
This is hard. So any more discussion on the main motion? Okay, and so for my own sake, because I'm like lost in the bureaucracy now.
The motion as amended.
Okay, and we're not motion as amended. Okay, got it. Okay. So erase, like, go behind the scenes, edit that part out, and we're now going to vote on the motion as amended. So all of those in favor of the motion as amended, show of hands. Okay, great, and we're unanimous on that as well. So that motion as amended passes. Thank you all. Good? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm up next too, Stephen. Yep.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we move on to the open government training.
Great, thank you. So I'll make those changes and I'll circulate those
Yeah,
rules for
thanks so much.
signature and update the website. Thank you. So my next item, again, I know I was here and presented to most of you. Commissioner Krass is the new audience for the next content I have, which is our annual open government training. So I'll try and move through this pretty quickly, and if you have any questions, let me know. So let me, not start my video. Let me share my other PowerPoint here. All right. Okay, so every year we train new commissioners, and we aim to also provide some sort of refresher training to all our board and commissioners on the state's two open meetings laws, the Open Public Meetings Act and the Public Records Act. And this is required of elected officials and members of Open Public Meetings Act compliant boards, which include the city's advisory boards like the Planning Commission, to make sure that you're familiar with these state laws. Of course, we as staff are helping you and the commission remain compliant all the time. But there are some things I'll be covering tonight that relate to your personal responsibility. So I just talked through this. So we want to reduce risk by giving you some education around these laws, and we certainly want to decrease any violations. The city has a wonderful track record, and we hope to continue it in these areas. So the first law I'll go over is the Open Public Meetings Act, and this is really aimed at ensuring public access to your decision-making as you're representing our community. And so it means that any meeting you have needs to be noticed in advance. We publish an agenda. It's posted outside. It's posted on our website. The door needs to be open. The password to the WebEx virtual meeting is posted so anyone can get in. There's no barriers. So that we can just maximize transparency. All of these boards like yours have regular meetings, and you have twice monthly meetings. You meet probably the most frequently of any of our advisory boards. But you also may have some special meetings. For example, if a quorum of you aren't available for a meeting in July, we might schedule, I believe tonight's a special meeting actually, because it's a different date or time. So anytime you're meeting outside of that regular every other Thursday schedule, it's considered a special meeting under the state law. And the one thing to know about that is you are restricted to only discussing and taking action on items on that agenda for any special meeting. So you can't bring up new items of business where that is a possibility at your regular meetings. So that is why we want you to know that. I think the idea is because you're meeting at a different time, the public may be less aware of your meeting, and so you have to kind of have that discipline to stick to the special meeting agenda. So we are aware of that, and we take care to be thorough in your special meeting agendas. So I went over this previously, but we always provide an agenda in advance for your benefit and for the public's benefit. Public comment is not required at every meeting, but we have it as a standing item on your agenda, and then you, of course, also have public hearings pretty frequently. There are some limited reasons under which you can have a closed meeting where the public is excluded. Those are called executive sessions, but there's a really narrow list of topics for which you can go into a closed session, and they most often occur at our city council. So if they're discussing collective bargaining, litigation, the sale of property, so they're pretty unlikely to occur here, but I want to just make you aware that it could happen, and we would have an attorney present if you were needing to go into one of those closed sessions. So something to think about here, and I guess the main point under talking about the Open Public Meetings Act is to think of times when there's sort of two situations we want you thinking about. One is 4 of you physically or virtually being present at one event or at one place. So say there was, like, the Highlands Council was hosting an event on, like, growth in Issaquah or something, and you guys had some interest in attending. We would really want to avoid having 4 of you attend, because technically that could be considered a meeting of the commission, especially if there were topics pertaining to the commission's work being discussed. So if something like that comes up, and I'm not sure how common that is for your commission. I know some of our commissions have a lot of local and regional groups that they like to participate with. We really encourage that you pick a few people to be spokespeople and report back to the commission at large. And if you do happen to find 3 of your commissioners at an event like that, don't cluster together and talk about the commission's work, because it could be perceived as a meeting of the commission, which would put us out of compliance with this state law. So that's one situation to be aware of. Social gatherings are okay, just don't talk about the commission's work. The second situation that I want to remind you about to avoid is what's called a serial meeting. And I think this one is fairly easy to fall into. So this is when you're sharing the perspectives of each other with multiple commissioners. So if you debrief with one commissioner after a meeting or before a meeting, and then one of those commissioners shares your discussion with the 3rd commissioner, and they share it with the 4th commissioner, you kind of had like a string of discussion culminating in the perspectives of 4 of you being talked about outside of a meeting. Again, not what we want under this state law. And so just if you want to debrief or chat in advance with one of your commissioners, just keep it to 1 or 2, and try to avoid sharing other perspectives. This also can really easily happen by email and forwarding of emails, or sharing opinions by email. So we just encourage you to avoid that, especially with multiple commissioners. It's helpful if you have information that you want to disseminate, that you share it with Stephen, and he can, as a neutral party, disperse it. And just keep email minimal. Keep it minimal, and try and avoid reply alls or really sharing an opinion. We want to hear your opinions at these meetings, and want them to be minimal and being formally shared outside of the meetings. I think I've pretty much covered the points there. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If not, I'll move on to the second. Well, there are some penalties, and the commission's action can be jeopardized. But again, we're working hard at all your regularly scheduled meetings to ensure compliance. So if you keep those 2 situations in mind that I highlighted, we're good. So the second state law is the Public Records Act, and so the city has some pretty onerous obligations to provide records to anyone in the world who asks at any time, and they fill out a form on our website, and at this point we do not, there are really no charges for providing these records, and there is a chance as a commissioner you could be asked for records, either pertaining to a particular one of you or pertaining to a project that you've heard. So we could be asked for all communication or correspondence around a particular project and might need to reach out to you. And so I want to go over a couple things for you to be mindful of. By and large, most of your content that you're reviewing is coming from us through the city, through your agendas, and through city email. So we have all those records. But if you're taking notes or producing any kind of document outside of our systems, please be organized with them. If you are a note taker, under our records obligations, notes are not something we are required to keep for any length of time. So once they've served their purpose to you, you are okay to get rid of them. And actually that's a healthy thing to do, because if we do get a request, you can't then get rid of them. You have to give us what you've got. So, some kind of healthy cleaning up of your notes digitally or by paper is a healthy thing, but if you want to just keep them, that's fine. Just know where they're at. So if we ask you, you can provide them to us. Email is another one. So I'm guessing a few of you may have a dedicated email for your commission communications. That's not a requirement, but again, if you are possibly emailing with someone, a member of the public, another commissioner, where a city staff person isn't CC'd on that email, we don't have that record. So we would ask you, if we got a records request, if you had any responsive emails, and we would need you to provide them for us. And so in some cases, the commissioner is more comfortable just having a separate email account, so they just know it's real clean and they know where everything is. Just also, having a folder, or just kind of having awareness of what you have, I guess, is the important thing. So those are the 2 points: notes and email, and hopefully we won't have to bother you with the public records request. But that's the main point there. If you have questions about any content you have or want to follow up, please reach out to me. My contact information is on the next slide. Commissioner Krass, you should have gotten a link to our code of ethics. I'm guessing the other commissioners have already completed this, but we do have an ethics form. The URL is on the screen here. And when able, we'd appreciate you looking through the code of ethics, and there's a little acknowledgement that you make. And it covers some of the topics that I am speaking to tonight, and it goes into a little more detail on a few other things. With that, you can reach me at clerks@issaquah.gov anytime you have questions, or also direct them to Stephen. And thank you for listening again.
Thanks, Tisha. Any questions? Okay. Thanks. Okay, so that concludes in our regular business for today. So we'll move on to reports. And first a city council update. So I'd like to ask Stephen if there are any updates.
I have a few for you tonight. So as many as you know, City Council adopted the Title 18 update on May 1st. The new virtual version will be online starting June 1st. And so once that's available, I'll send that out to all the commissioners. What's changing with the formatting online is we're adding direct link references in the code, something that wasn't available before, so that when a definition comes up or a reference to another section of code, the link will actually be right there in the code itself. So you're not having to now look up that other section to find where the definition is or where that other reference is. You'll be able to directly link it from whatever section you're reading in the code, which is going to be a huge help for all of us who use the code fairly regularly, but also for a huge help for people just trying to understand what our code is trying to say. The other biggest change that's coming with that is the navigation of the code will be much more easier. Before it was almost like an online PDF version where you just had to look through. Now there's actually going to be a navigation table as you're looking through that'll help you look at what section you're in, what other sections are nearby, being able to easily navigate to the other sections without having to just scroll down. You can go to the navigation table. So the navigation of the code will be significantly easier as well. That's it for that update. next week, there's the Title 18 celebration party. I'm hoping you all can attend. Let me know if you're not able to attend. That'll just help us keep track of quorums for all the boards and commissions. We're planning an exciting event for all of you. Food will be provided and drinks, but also just a general thank you for everyone that's been involved in this entire process, just because for how large this project has been, we want to make sure everybody is recognized in every level of effort that went into this update to our land use code. The last update that I have for you is that we have the June tours. So all your regular meetings in June are canceled, and instead we have the tours scheduled with small groups of you so we can take a look at some upcoming policy discussions we'll be having specifically around housing. We'll be talking some transportation in some of these tours as it relates to housing and answering your questions around that, but it's really going to be focused on the housing discussions that'll be upcoming as part of the comprehensive plan update. There'll be some code updates that will result from some of these discussions, but it really is focused on a lot of the goals and policies embedded in the comprehensive plan. And lastly, July. All your July meetings, that'll actually be kicking off many of those policy discussions we'll be having on policy following the tours in June. That's it for staff report.
Great, thank you. Any other business from anyone here? Okay. Well, thank you all for the grace you gave me as I tried to navigate that. With there being no further business before the commission, I adjourn today's meeting at 7:53 p.m. Thank you all.